Today we're going to move into talking about what I might consider to be sort of like the global age, although in reality the global age has existed for thousands upon thousands of years. But I'm really going to focus upon the global age, particularly since World War II, which is basically where I started my life. And what I'll try to do is I'm going to look at it sort of from an Australian perspective, from my own perspective, looking at where we were globally in the 50s and 60s and where we are globally now. And then I want to look at the global forces at work across history, and particularly in today's world, and segue that into a discussion of the global issues, particularly around the knowledge economy. And talking about the knowledge economy, I will talk about UBC extensively as an example of a Western university and what it strives for. And then I'll look at it, some of the global competition that goes on, that universities all over the world are responding to, nations all over the world are responding to, what those forces are, and particularly focus on China actually. Looking at their ambitions, and I don't mean to be demeaning with this, but the games that they find themselves playing, striving to be a global player in the knowledge economy. And then finally, I'd like to take a step back from that and ask ourselves, what does this mean? What do we see as the dominant issues occurring in this age of globalization, particularly around the knowledge economy? And what is our role? What should we be doing, particularly for those folks interested in global issues or global research issues? But I think also for all of us, because in one sense, we may be not necessarily cognizant of what really is going on in this age of this global age we're in. So let me get started. I guess I'd like to get started by asking you to think about the global age relative to yourself. And I'd like you to sort of take a sort of a then and now perspective. Now, I can go back decades, fortunately, unfortunately, but I'd like you to go back to a time when you can sort of remember growing up and what it was like to see yourself and think about yourself in a global fashion. As you're aware, I grew up in Australia, which at that point was a long way from anywhere. You know, quite a cruise, a boat ride from Europe or to the States, or a plane ride. And you know, I just as most white Australians, was a son of a mother who was born in Australia and a father was, but their parents were immigrants, European immigrants, Norwegian and Irish. And like many Australians, I had those sort of immigrant roots. One of my ancestors was part of the first colonization of Australia. But in terms of thinking about the globe, I would sort of estimate that the extent to which I thought about global issues that was a part of my life was pretty insignificant. You know, at that point, you know, I remember in the 5th grade having to do a project called The Shrinking World. And what we focused on in terms of what made the world to be a shrinking world was airlines, because at that point airlines were flying all the way to Australia. Indeed, if you go back and look at Australia's history, that first flight to Australia was a very significant things. You had underwater wiring coming to Australia. So, and indeed, as a young kid, I worked as what they called a telegram boy, delivering telegrams that might have come in from overseas. But airlines connected us. Sometimes our families, our relatives overseas connected us. But growing up in Australia, the other thing that connected us was television. And it connected us to a large extent to US and British worlds. Australia was certainly a colony at this point in time, and it still is to some extent a colony, colonized by the British. And the influence of that upon Australia is immense in terms of the curriculum and immense in terms of what you saw on television, what was reported to you. It was a world Australia, maybe Britain, and a little bit of the US. And then in the 1950s, 1956 is when television came to Australia, more or less, at the same time as the Olympics were held in Melbourne, a city just south of where I was from, which was Sydney. But that shrunk the world. It gave it sort of connectivity. But to a large extent, my world was local. And I remember I got the opportunity to go to the States, and I'd been teaching for a few years in Australia. And I remember telling some of my friends, hey, I'm heading to the States. I'm going to be over there for a while. And they said, why are you doing that? And, indeed, I didn't have really a good answer to that question. And my mother really encouraged me to head off. I don't think she'd had me, but she was encouraged me to go off. But I felt, to a large extent, that I was fairly parochial. I was quite a, in a sense, Australian nationalist with a lot of Australian pride, but not realising until I got out of Australia what Australia was really about, actually, geographically, what a wonderful country it was, but also to the extent to which was quite a classed and racist society. Now, and so interesting, back to yourselves, think about yourselves then, and think about yourselves now. And boy, I don't think I could actually give this a portion. I sort of feel like my whole life is sort of a mixture of global and local. I spend my time, whether it's watching news on television or traveling. I travel extensively between Canada and Australia and the United States and Asia, and occasionally to Europe and Africa. My thinking and my views are very much tied up with global perspectives. I sort of feel like I live in a very different world to what it was like there. In one sense, perhaps I may seem to you like somebody who was on the farm. I wasn't. I was living in a city, Sydney, close to a beach community, and now I sort of live in a similar geographic location, but the dynamics of my life is quite different.